Risk is the probable occurrence of an adverse effect, often described as the probability of something happening, multiplied by the consequence of the action. While everything has some risk associated with it, we need to manage what might be an acceptable level of risk and find ways to reduce it. This could be by implementing preventative measures to reduce the consequences, or finding ways to reduce the probability of the event happening. While this video looks at environmental risk, you may also encounter process safety or other occupational risks, as well as financial risk and others. Environmental risk looks at the possibility of waste affecting human health or the environment. The impact may depend on the characteristics of the waste as well as the vulnerability of those exposed. Risk could be identified either as a lethal concentration or a lethal dose. There is some risk in everything we do, from eating to standing outside our homes to driving or flying in aeroplanes. Even if we are not taking part in the activity, it is possible to be exposed to risk, for example being exposed to secondhand cigarette smoke. Some activities have a very low risk and we accept these in our day-to-day lives, while others have a much higher risk, which we are aware of, but make a risk-reward decision based on the benefit or pleasure the activity might bring under normal conditions. Of concern are the activities that pose a potentially high risk to us, which we are either unaware of or have no control over. To assess the environmental risk of a chemical, we are going to proceed in 4 steps. Firstly, a hazard identification is undertaken to determine whether or not a chemical could be potentially harmful to us. Secondly, we perform a dose-response assessment to understand the response we might have to a harmful chemical. Thirdly, the exposure assessment looks at the size and nature of the population that has been exposed, and at what concentration and duration that they have been exposed. Lastly, risk characterization integrates all these steps to determine the possible health issues. The toxicity of chemicals and the impact on the environment can be determined by several factors. These include ecotoxicity, biological changes, bioaccumulation, concentration, and others. Carcinogenesis is the process that causes cancer. In the first stage, initiation, a mutation alters the cell's genetic material, which may result in cell multiplication. In the second stage, promotion, cells no longer recognize growth constraints and tumors develop. If the tumor undergoes metastasis, it is said to be malignant and it breaks through into other areas of the body. Mutagenesis is the ability of chemicals to change an organism's DNA. While this takes time to develop, these chemicals are, in their own way, toxic. LD50 is a measure of the amount of a chemical resulting in the death of half of a group of test specimens. The lower the amount of toxin needed, the higher the toxic value of this chemical. A rough guideline is that a chemical is toxic if the LD50 is less than 15 milligrams per kilogram. However, there are some problems with the LD50. The physiology of the human body is often different to the test specimen, and it does not consider the effects of multiple chemicals at once. Of interest in the LD50 values is that most chemicals have a lethal dose. This includes water. However, for some of these substances it is very difficult to ingest the amounts required for a lethal dose. It is also interesting to note that some chemicals, which are seen as potentially dangerous, are safer than others. This should be taken in context, since we would often consume some of these chemicals in moderation while others, such as pesticides, are purposefully not harmful to humans.